Hi there. Today we're going to be talking about my best friend, the incremental save. I hear Leonard talked about this a little bit in his presentation yesterday as well. So we'll see how much I contradict him or he contradicts me. A quick intro, if you weren't here yesterday when I did my other presentation. I am currently a product strategy lead at Verisk, which is in the insurance vertical. We do underwriting, fraud detection, and a bunch of other tool things. And if you're in the US, we probably know exactly what your driving record is, so don't try to pull the wool over our eyes. I'm also the co-chair of the PDF Forensics Working Group. I'm a former project leader for PDF UA and the main PDF spec. And I used to be at Microsoft for a very long time, including the last 8 years or so when I focused on file formats and accessibility standards. And these two dogs, the top one is my puppy, who's actually 1.5 years old now and thinks he's still allowed to do puppy things. And the bottom is my first homebred champion. It's Puck and Poe, just to make things a little confusing. So, quick overview of what PDF Forensics is, because there are a couple of different tracks for PDF Forensics. And in this instance, PDF Forensics is the examination of files to find anomalies that may be because of fraudulent purposes or some other nefarious purpose. We do all kinds of files, and it depends on which area you're working in. In my area, it's a lot of invoices, a lot of reports, police reports, home inspection reports, estimates, all that kind of thing. And if I were in another vertical, it might be passports, it might be other identity, it might be forms, with the IRS for our taxes in the US. Those folks have to do some forensics examination on documents at certain times, and those are usually all saved as PDFs. The part that I'm not going to talk about at all is PDF forensics for security purposes. In a big sense, and I might hurt some people's feelings here, I don't care. I don't care if there's malicious stuff in your file. That's not what I'm looking for. It's not interesting to me, and it's okay if it's there, because I can play in a sandbox. Some of the common uses. My group creates tools to detect fraud. So we're looking for places where people have hidden things, people have edited files in some way, and that could be a lot of different things. And incremental saves is one of the best ways that we can look at files and see those changes. So let's move on. These are some different types of files that you might see, that we might see. So this is a fake passport. There's an invoice from Amazon. This is a bill of lading, a Washington State driver's license, typical invoices. This is a fake report, and this is an insurance card from the US. And then we see things like your basic receipt from a restaurant as well. One of the big things that we have trouble determining when we're doing forensics work is intent. What was the intent of the change in the document? When you look at a lot of documents, you'll see that the create date and the modify date are different. Does that mean anything? A lot of times the answer is no, because there's a lot of things that can cause those two things to differ. It could be the file was linearized, it could be that somebody fixed the logo, it could be that 2 or more people were working on the document. There's all kinds of things that can cause those things to differ. But one of the things that that incremental saves helps us with is looking for intent. PDF is not really a fixed format, no matter how many people tell you otherwise at this symposium this week. It is infinitely changeable. Many of you come from companies who have editors of PDF, so you should know that PDF is not fixed. It makes for a very difficult landscape sometimes for detecting fraud, because most insurance companies will tell you that it's a fixed format, and that's why they require it. They don't understand how it can be edited or why. And we try to figure out whether the person who has edited the file intended a simple edit, like linearization or like changing a logo or whatever, or if they did it for more nefarious purposes, like taking somebody else's receipt and changing it so that it looks like it belongs to them. And version history is one of the best ways to understand the intention of these edits. And version history is what we have been calling the work that we're doing around incremental saves. Very briefly, what is an incremental save? So this picture here you might have all seen in ISO 32000, and before that many times. It is the standard, what does the file look like on first save? It's a nice, neat little package. Then if we do an incremental save, and I would say that if you think of the full save as file save as, and the incremental save as file save, that's generally the way I think of it so that I can keep the two of them straight. File save then gives you a new packet each time. Whoops, wrong button. Gives you a new save each time you get a new body, a new trailer, and all the good updated stuff. The file structure for PDF is well defined in section 7.5 of ISO 32000. It talks about cross-reference tables and streams, how you track objects, how you show the changes, how to keep the pointers available, and then additional trailer info as well. Cross-reference tables are the older way that we used to do tracking through the files. This was before 1.5. They enable quick access to object by their location. They're best used for smaller, simpler files. They can still be used. Are they deprecated, Peter? No. You can still use these in your PDF files these days. They're perfectly fine, and they work just fine with other things. Cross-reference streams were introduced in 1.5 and store the data in a stream instead. They're better for bigger files, more complicated files. 32,000 probably is a good example of that. They're much more efficient for large PDFs, and they replace the traditional cross-reference trailers. What about hybrids? Please don't. There are too many that I've ever seen, and they're not terribly useful for anybody anymore. And you won't find them as a header in 32,000. You have to go looking for them. So some use cases for incremental save. Version history tracking, collaboration, audit trails, efficient updates. Preservation of historic data is a really nice one. One of the things that I would say is that incremental saves are not just for forensics works. They're also really great for the folks in the archiving industry and for anyone who wants to do history tracking on documents. They preserve signatures and they have better recovery potential. So this is just a quick comparison of the differences between incremental and full saves. And the one thing that I would say about this is that two things actually. One, yes, an incremental save can grow the size of your file pretty quickly, depending on what your file is like. For small files, it's not a big deal. For big files, it can be a big deal. We've seen some that are substantial file sizes that have up to 141 or 42 incremental saves, which is a little scary if you think about the potential for data loss in those. Generally speaking, it's not a big deal because they don't grow that much and most files are not that big. The other piece here is security. I mentioned it earlier. Incremental saves do expose some vectors for attack. However, so does just about everything else. So how do you find an incremental save? This is just quickly going through looking at the file itself. You look in the file trailer first to find them. You find the end of file markers. You look for a prev key, find the cross-reference stream, and walk back the markers. It's not that difficult to do if you've got a file that's mostly ASCII. It's a lot more difficult if you have a file that's mostly binary. But there are a lot of tools that can help. So a lot of text editors, you can just open the file in the text editor and walk through them. There's a lot of open source tools for letting you take the document apart and find things. And then there's a lot of proprietary tools, including Acrobat. So this is an example incremental save, and I've had to truncate this quite a bit, but let's see here. The top one, you can see there's an end of file mark on each one of these, and then you can go back through the streams up here, find the info, and I can't see well enough to point at specific things, but you'll also see there is the instance ID and the document ID up there. Those are changing as well, and there's pointers throughout to previous sections. So the best way that we have figured out in our work is actually the third bullet point, which is rolling our own, in order to create tools that will restore the file history from your document. It's sort of straightforward, but really not. There's a lot of proprietary tools out there. They may or may not be open for licensing. They're usually created by companies that do volume forensic examination like we do, and they're generally limited to company or partner use. There's some open source tools like PDF Resurrect. This is actually one that we looked into, and Peter helped us look into it a bit. It previously was under a very copyleft license. It's now very open source and available for anybody to use, thanks to my manager who had a chat with the author of the tool. It's good for quick and dirty, but if you go out and find it on GitLab or GitHub, it has a whole section of caveats of what the problems are with it, and that doesn't really give you all the problems with the tool. And then rolling your own is the best option in my opinion, but it depends on what you're doing again. This is basically what we did, and 32,000 gives you the nice information on how to do this with various libraries. So, how can PDF Forensics use incremental saves? Basically what we do is we run the file through our tools, we get all of the various generations of the document rendered back to us, and then we can find where the changes are. And what we look for in my particular vertical is prices, names, dates, account numbers, descriptions, insertion of signatures, form fields, timing of changes, types of documents, changes in editors. If you remember what the opening slide looked like, it was 4 different documents that had a ton of red boxes in them. That was a template that was taken apart, and someone, actually me, replaced every single price in those templates. So there are 4 generations, and every one of them has almost everything in the document changed. We don't see a lot of that. We generally see something that looks more like this invoice. This one doesn't have a change highlighted in it right now, but we see a lot of things like this that are fairly simple invoices that have the name of the customer in a specific location. It's really easy to white that out or overwrite it or change it in some way. We see a lot of places where they simply change the prices on the items that are in the invoice. Sometimes you can catch them by the fact that they haven't remembered to change the tax or the VAT. But these are all things that we're looking for. Then once we've got the documents and we can see the different generations, we have to figure out whether something is malicious or not. There's a lot of workflow things that happen, including linearization and filling out forms and using a template. Those are usually fairly obvious. But then there's also things like changing key information on forms, like the person that was billed, or the prices of the items, or addresses for the businesses sometimes. And in the case of an ID, they might alter some but not all of the information about the person. So a quick linearization example. It technically is an incremental save usually, but it's not quite as interesting as other incremental saves because it doesn't give you a lot of information other than the fact that the file was linearized. It basically kills everything else. Plus, if you try to do an incremental save over the top of it, you lose the linearization, so that's not necessarily helpful either. Here's a form. This happens to be the wages and tax statement from the US. And you can see that there are numbers filled out for the wages and the taxes withheld, and there are also information about who the employer was and who the employee was. So that looks pretty innocuous, other than the fact there are misalignments, but that happens all the time because on these types of forms anyway. But if you look at the document again, through version history, you see that one version back, there was a completely different name on this. Everything else was the same, but the name was different. And you wouldn't see that commonly. You wouldn't see a tax document that was exactly identical for two people from the same company even. So those are some of the things that we can find. Here's an example of another receipt. And you can see the one on, this side doesn't show anything. This is what the current document is. If we go back a generation, then we are getting the other document with all the black boxes, and you can see all of the changes that were made on the document. So this is one where intent can be a little tricky to figure out because it's quite possible that a business had a template made for them and then they forgot how to use the template. We see this fairly often. We don't see wholesale changes like this as much, but we do sometimes see it. And that business now takes whatever document they most recently printed and just changes all the information in it rather than going back to the original template. So in this case, it looks like it might be to commit fraud, but when you look at it this way, now you see that there's 4 generations of the document, and every one of them has wholesale changes to names, addresses, prices, and all the other info. Often, though, what we see is much smaller amounts of changes in these, and those you can tell usually whether there's potential fraud there, whereas this one looks like they just had a template that they were using and didn't know how to use properly. So here's one where this is a really good example of something that we see fairly often. The top 2 documents, the difference that you can really see is the price. So that's the current version plus the one version back. If you go back another version, invoice has, receipt is now invoice. So it's fairly common, especially among like construction companies, that they'll send an invoice to somebody, and when it's paid, they will simply change the word invoice to receipt. Some will add a watermark that says paid, some will do something else, but fairly often we'll see this where there's just invoices changed to receipt, or estimate is changed to receipt or to invoice. One of the issues around incremental saves is that there are a lot of invisible changes. So the ones I've shown you so far have all been visible, but there's a lot of things that you can't see. And if you are rendering each one of those versions, you will get a version sometimes that looks like nothing has changed in it. It'll either have all of the same highlights. Well, the highlights are on our end, but it'll have all the same things highlighted, or it will look like nothing at all has changed. And there's a lot of reasons for that. This is just the top list. Changes to compression don't show up. You can't see a lot of changes sometimes in associated files depending on how you're rendering things. Changes to objects in text that don't have a visual representation. So if you have a link to something in your page and someone has changed the underlying link, you won't necessarily see that visually on the page. Changes to encryption, optional content, all annotations, all those things that don't necessarily have visual representation. I mentioned earlier that I am not particularly concerned about security. I'm concerned in the sense that it's not a great thing to have documents floating around out there that have security risks. So that's important. But from a forensic standpoint of what we do, it's not that important. In fact, the first one, sensitive data may be recoverable even after redaction or deletion. We kind of like that. However, there are privacy concerns with that, so you do have to watch out. Make sure you're doing secure redaction, removing sensitive content at the object level. Encrypting files has a problem because some of the older encryptions that's still used in PDF leaves you open to attack. There's a technical specification for that. I believe that helps to update some of that, and just use your best coding practices. And then the other thing is malicious code can be embedded in an incremental save, but that's true of anything, just about. You can have malicious stuff embedded in any file format. So, I don't know where we are in time. Okay. So incremental saves can be one of the most useful tools that we have in PDF forensics. They allow us to see the generations of the document that have been changed and to understand better what those changes are. We can make some guesses about intent. In some cases, we can tell intent pretty easily. In other cases, we can make good, educated guesses. Being able to trace the versions can illuminate workflow versus fraud. There's a lot of really valid workflows out there in PDF that give you incremental saves, or do if they're using a tool that has incremental saves. I should say that we probably see about 10% of the files we get have incremental saves in them. If we're lucky, that's probably as high as I've seen. And it is dependent. Our numbers are not great in terms of industry numbers because what we see is pretty skewed by what our insurers are using for tools. We have some of the biggest insurers in the United States that we work with, and if they're using a set of tools to gather files or to take pictures or whatever, we are dependent on that tool to give us that data, and it may not match up with data from any other insurance company or from the industry as a whole. So when I say 10%, it's 10% of a couple of insurers. I love incremental saves because they can also be great for looking at versioning and restoring other versions in a collaborative workflow. PDF's not the best thing for that, but it can be done. I love that you can preserve historical data. I keep thinking of the instance where you have a famous writer like Emily Dickinson. If she had been doing PDFs back in the 1700s, we might have a really good view of how she did her editing on her poetry. That would be a very cool thing to have. And you could do that with incremental saves. And archivists can do that now with incremental saves if they're trying to track legislative work or whatever. One of the big things is right now there are not enough producers who are doing incremental saves, and it's been getting less and less every year. That's a problem for us because it is one of the most useful tools we have. And so I would encourage you, if you're a producer or a creator, to enable incremental saves. I would like you to default to incremental saves, but that's just because of what I do and where I sit right now. And those security issues can be mitigated. They won't go away entirely, but they can be made better. So, questions?
Any questions for Cherie? So I have one, Cherie. So we've heard a lot this week about accessibility. So you were seeing a lot more tagged PDFs, so with logical structure, et cetera, et cetera. And is that coming through as, do you think that's reducing incremental saves? Because I imagine there's workflows and, in Europe at least, EAA requires this, I imagine, for many of these kinds of documents. And now maybe this is a European thing and not a US thing. Do you want to talk to maybe the change that you think that accessibility might bring?
That's a good question, and not one that I've thought about too much yet, because right now we don't see a lot of documents with tagging unless we have something that started out as like a receipt in Office. Very few of our files are tagged. So right now that's not a consideration for us, but I can see it becoming more so because we are having to comply with more and more regulations. That may be an issue for incremental saves. We are also hoping that C2PA manifests are going to give us a whole lot more info on those files. If they've been remediated and the incremental save is lost, that's going to help us a lot. One other thing is that we do have a lot of dependencies on the insurance companies who pass us these files. Sometimes they will touch the files in some way that destroys a lot of information. Occasionally they're actually stripping metadata, which is the dumbest thing that they can probably do for us. So we are spending a lot of time educating the insurance companies and reaching out to them and to the PDF community, saying, help us out, make this easier for us.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? I do have one more. So you said that these upstream people strip out metadata. Are they consciously doing that because of like privacy rules, or are they doing it because they're using old software or something?
They're consciously doing it. I think part of it, at least, is because of privacy rules. Most of them understand that our systems are really secure, so I don't know why they're continuing to do it with us. We have some of the most draconian security on our files that you can imagine. I can't share files with anybody in the UK. I can't share files with India. It's always fun to do our development because our development's in India, and I can't share real files with them. I have to try to recreate things. But what was the question again?
Or just sort of like their intention of doing it versus accidentally doing it?
Some of it is, like stripping the metadata is usually intentional. However, they also do a lot of things like they'll save a file as part of their workflow, and they don't know that they're overwriting data. They have no idea what's in that PDF file that they're killing. And that's one of the reasons that we're reaching out to educate our insurers. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you have any strong opinions on what changes should be added to the PDF file to make incremental save more useful for this functionality?
I would say that there's not a lot that needs to be added. I know Leonard's got some ideas for fixing, and that is true, perhaps, but we have enough information now that we can do a pretty good job of recreating files from the metadata stream or the metadata tables. We're not having too much trouble with consistency and accuracy as we back up, although there is the potential for that, especially in files that have a lot of incremental saves. Like I mentioned, we've got files, I think they're from SafeDocs actually, that have 140, 150 incremental saves. And I don't know about you, but as someone who keeps autosave on all the time, I want to be making sure that my file integrity is there as I go, and I'm not going to be waiting to do a save as that many saves. But there's not a ton that we would ask for from the specification itself. However, it would be more asking the community to help us out by actually doing incremental saves, or allowing them anyway.
Thank you. Any further questions for Cherie? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Cherie.